Hi, my name is Dave. Today we're going to have a look at this model of the SpaceX Starship and Super Heavy booster that I've assembled. And it's also a telescope. If you know me, you know that I'm into making telescopes. So this is also can be converted to a telescope. If you haven't seen it, I also have a video about this model. This is a model of the Saturn V moon rocket that took us to the moon back in the 1960s. It's to scale. These are both at the same scale. This is 1 to 144 scale, so these things are gigantic monsters, of course, but reduced to a very manageable scale. I made this one, and it is also convertible to a telescope. I have a video about this, so if you'd like to have a look at that, I'd recommend that you do that. But it's also very interesting, while I've got them sitting next to each other, to compare the dimensions, the overall dimensions. This rocket ship is about the same diameter, quite a bit taller, and is a considerably bigger rocket than the moon rocket. This, when it does fly, and I presume it will be flying very soon, when it does fly, will be the biggest rocket that we've ever produced, that human beings have ever launched into space. We'll talk more about this, but this is a fascinating rocket, and it's in the development process right now. So anyway, if you haven't seen it yet, you may want to watch the video about this one. In the meantime, I'll show you more about this one. Let's take a look at this model from the top to the bottom. I want to point out that this right here, this cowling, is of my construction. It's my imagination. At the point of filming, which is early September 2021, at the point of filming here, we don't have any kind of a structure here. It's all a bunch of pipes and plumbing for these rockets. These rockets, the Raptor rockets down there at the bottom, there are 29 of them total on the bottom of this spacecraft. I modeled those with 832 bolts, which actually turned out to be just about perfect. But they've just got exposed plumbing right now. I'm not sure if SpaceX will eventually put this kind of a cowling around it or not. I don't know. Anyway, there may be a lot of things that will change about this thing before it's all done. Let's stop here for a minute. I'll point out that these flaps do articulate. This is just like the real thing. And many of the things about this model are not exactly precise. These things, these grid fins, are highly compromised. They do articulate the way the real ones will, apparently, at least on the existing version as it is today. These grid fins don't look at all like that. Well, they look something like that. They're about the same scale, and this does have holes in it at least. So, but this is the best I could machine. These things do articulate properly, just like the real deal. And this stage does separate. The Super Heavy does separate from the Starship up here, right there, and I'll show you that here in a minute. Now, these flaps also articulate just like the real thing. One of the things that's going to change apparently is the shape of this nose cone. I guess you want to call it, is going to change a little bit. They've redesigned this and it's going to have a slightly different shape now. Probably won't be terribly noticeable, but there could be, on the final version, a lot of things will change. As a matter of fact, this is a model of, if you know anything about starships, SN8, which is the starship that first did the belly flop maneuver. Immortalized in my mind. Anyway, and it will probably look, it will for sure look quite a bit different, because the one that's going to actually fly into orbit will be covered with black tiles, insulating tiles, so that it can avoid burning up during re-entry when it finally does launch. So there's quite a few things that aren't exactly precise about this. The scale is pretty much dead on, though. Let me show you what it looks like when I separate these two. This is not the way the real ones separate, by the way. Obviously, this isn't legit. This is the SN8 model. I have thought about maybe painting half of it black or doing something to make it look more like the Starship that's actually going to go into orbit. But I kind of, I love good old SN8. It was just a wonderful moment when that thing came down and did the belly flop maneuver. It's a very, very cool thing. I was excited as a kid. I was as excited as I was when they launched the Saturn V to the moon. So it was pretty cool. Anyway, this is how they launched it like that. Came up, went down, did a belly flop maneuver. They're maneuvering these flaps all the time and doing some stuff to keep the thing aerodynamic, and then they came and straightened it out and landed it. And of course, it didn't successfully land. I think it wobbled off and crashed and stuff. But it did the belly flop maneuver, which was astounding. It wasn't until a little bit later, one of the later versions, that they finally did a successful landing with that. Completely amazing. I think it will be equally amazing when and if they can get one of these guys to fly with the Starship and put one of these starships into orbit and hopefully land it successfully. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Well, let me separate this model from its base so you can see what's happening. There's that. And you can see this. In this particular instance, I put 29 of these bolts, and I've arranged them in the same pattern as the Raptor engines on the Super Heavy booster. Apparently in the final version there may be 31. A little uncertain right now, but there's 29 for now. It's a lot of rocket engines on the bottom of that thing. And let me show you what happens here. I can just unscrew this. That comes off. Here are the parts that I'm going to use to make this into a telescope. Okay, I've removed this part with all the Raptor engines. I've got this. This is actually an objective from a 60mm telescope. It's a fairly decent 60mm f900 telescope. Screws right on there. Went as far as at least semi-polishing the dew shield for the thing. Okay. Now we have to put the focuser on. This part of the nose cone comes off. This goes on. And then this goes in there. And this is actually a helical focusing star diagonal. So let me show you what this looks like on a mount. Okay, let's put this on this mount. This is a Unitron mount, actually modified Unitron mount. I think you'll agree that looks at least a little bit like a real Starship. And it's actually a usable telescope. It actually is not a bad telescope. It's a 60mm f/15. You can hardly make one of those that's bad in terms of the optics. They're a pretty simple telescope. Very common, but also pretty effective little telescope. So it's not bad. Just for comparison's sake, this little tube here is about the dimensions of the Hubble Space Telescope. So imagine, and you know, there have been rumors that Elon Musk wants to make this into a giant telescope, which would be completely wonderful. Imagine how much better it would be than this is the Hubble Space Telescope to scale. Imagine how how a telescope like this would function. Of course, you got some problems. You got some fuel tanks here and engines here and so forth. Still, it would be a lot of fun to make this into a telescope. I've seen pictures of them with a hatch up here and something coming out that would be approximately the same size as the Hubble, or maybe a bit bigger than the Hubble. So you could do that with the existing plans, because this is not all fuel tank here. There's a cargo from about there on up. Cargo or humans or whatever. So so you could put the Hubble Space Telescope inside this if you wanted to, or something, probably something bigger. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video on the SpaceX Starship Super Heavy Booster / telescope. Thank you very much for watching.